Hello, everybody. My name is Netty Bryan. Well, my official name is Netty Bryan, and I am a domestic abuse survivor, proud domestic abuse survivor. And I just want to first of all thank Irina for inviting me to come along and to share my story and my experience of what it was like being in a long-term abusive relationship, but from a perspective today of honoring all the women, all the fabulous women around the world who have actually survived domestic abuse. And as we know, guys, domestic violence is committed by someone in the victim's domestic circle. We know this. This might include their partners, ex-partners. It could include immediate family members, other relatives, and family friends. And the term domestic violence is used when there's actually a close relationship between the offender and, of course, the victim. And I'm just going to share some statistics with you from a perspective of England. And according to our National Office of Statistics, they say about 4.2% of men and 7.9% of women suffered domestic abuse in England and Wales during 2018. So in figures, this equates to about 685,000 male victims and 1.3 million women victims. Can you see the difference there? So on average, 2 women are murdered every single week and 30 men are murdered every single year due to domestic violence. And here's the funny thing, the most common ages when intimate partner abuse happens or first starts or is first experienced by women in particular is between the ages of 18 to 24. And in my own life, my domestic abuse started much younger. I was only 16 when my domestic abuse started. And if you were with me back in 1985, you would have seen a happy-go-lucky young child, pigtails in her hair, with ribbons, really just going about her 15-and-a-half-year-old life. And suddenly you would have found me at home with my parents, who were real devout Christian women, and mother and father, sorry. And I was there with my 2 sisters, Jen and Dawn. But sadly, in my household, my mother had severe mental health problems. So therefore, there were times when she was away from home and she was unable to look after us. And as a result of that, we ended up going to family members, going to church members, and had a very disjointed childhood. Sometimes we wouldn't go to school. And as a result of that, it really made our parenting attachment very, very difficult. And we grew up in a very authoritarian household. It was very much the story that most Black African American or Black Jamaican heritage children experience in their household. So that type of environment, very religious, also made us very fearful of males. And the reason why I'm giving you this backdrop of the story is so that you can understand how my journey started. So as a result of that, I got to an age when I was about 15, as you do as a teenager. I wanted to get out into the big wild world and see and explore what I thought I was actually missing. But lo and behold, I really wasn't missing much. I met my abuser at 15 and a half at a party. He was 7 years older than myself. And I was just minding my own business, enjoying the music. And then he made a connection with a lady that was there, I was there with. And of course, I shouldn't have been at that party because I was wearing shoes that were too big for me. You've heard that term before, you're acting bigger than your age. Well, that was the situation with me. And sadly, I got caught in a relationship with that guy. His name's Charlie. And, our relationship from that moment forward lasted 18 long years. And why, you might be asking, wow, 18 years that situation lasted for me. Well, firstly, you might want to know, well, how did I get caught in that? Well, there's two words to that, is I was taken and it wasn't voluntary. And I know what that looks like now. So I was almost groomed into that situation. And sad to say, because I was a vulnerable child, because I had missed out on the support from knowing the dangers out there, I fell into the arms of somebody who took advantage of that. And sad to say, I now know, of course, much years later, that he had come from a very troubled childhood himself. He had been abused by his parents. He had been abused by the care system and was living on the streets at a very young age. So very disjointed childhood himself. Plus, he was somebody who smoked quite a lot of marijuana, which didn't help the situation. Journeying on through my life, I had two children, beautiful children. And my first child, I had at a very young age of 16. And I didn't want to get rid of my son, so I kept him. And I'm so glad I did, because he's turned into a beautiful young man now. But here's the thing, guys. I thought that I had to. I thought that I had to stay in that situation, which was wrong thinking. The thinking that I had was based around the fact that my parents always had this ideology that you stay with the person you have a child with. So falsely, that belief system stayed with me. And so I had one child, and then I had another child. And the abuse just got worse. It didn't stop. It was physical, it was emotional, it was psychological. And it was even spiritual. I'm going to say that it was even spiritual abuse. And the thing for me, you asked the question, how did I cope with all of this? There was a lot of belittling. There was a lot of name calling. There was a lot of shaming, and a lot of experiencing of him having other women and all those different things. And I really didn't have a voice. So how did I cope with this? I coped, number one, by sewing myself into my children, because I thought that, I'd lost my youth. He'd stolen my youth. He'd stolen my teens. He'd stolen my womanhood. What more could he steal? And I always remembered my father saying something to me. He would always say to me that people can take your house, your car, and everything from you tangibly, but they can never steal your faith and your mind. So I always held on to my faith in the hardest of times. And I'm telling you, as I'm speaking it now, imagine this situation magnified by 1,000. It wasn't easy. There were times that I was so fearful for my life that I didn't know whether I would survive an episode. There were times where I was locked in my room. There were times where I was kicked out of my own bedroom. There were times where food was withheld from me. There were times where I was beat up so bad I couldn't even go to work. There were times where I used to self-medicate with marijuana myself because I didn't know any better, to ease the pain. So I understand. I get it. It's not hard. And I always used to think that other people out there wouldn't understand what I'm going through. So I never used to say anything. Because back in the 80s, domestic abuse to the police was only ever seen as another domestic. So they just used to brush it off as something that had no seriousness behind it. But little did they know, look at those statistics I gave you earlier. Hundreds of thousands, 1.3 million women, that's the statistic today, had lost their lives due to being left in abusive relationships. And of course, maybe have tried to leave multiple times. And the question that used to bug me the most was, well, why don't you just leave him? Why are you still putting up with that? Why are you still there? But here's the thing, guys. People don't realize how difficult and how hard it is to actually leave. And trust me, I left so many times. I left with clothes. I left without clothes. I left without food, literally children under my arm, and left but he would always come looking for me and blackmail me to come back. And if you can connect with that, just put something in the comments to let me know that you're feeling that too. And it is so challenging. It is so difficult when you are going through that type of emotional whitemailing. Okay. So it wasn't for the fact that I didn't want to leave. It was the fact that I felt I couldn't. Even though there were no locks on the front doors, I was emotionally in jail. He had what's the word I'm looking for? He had made me feel like I couldn't move. He had debilitated me mentally. He had got me mentally. And when someone gets you psychologically, that is a bigger hold than perhaps being hit physically. And I'm sorry to say that, but I believe psychological abuse is probably worse than physical abuse, because every time I got hit, I knew that I could get up and recover. But every time there was that psychological imprinting, that psychological name calling, that psychological nail pressing, I felt it was harder to remove that pain from my heart. Okay. So when you ask that question, what did I do to cope? Well, my one thing that I used to cope was focusing on my children and trying to make, I called it at the time, making the best life out of a chaotic situation. What helped me to cope was knowing that this too will pass. I didn't know when. I didn't know when God was going to put an end date on it, but I knew, because I had the faith to believe that that end date would come. And trust me, that end date came. And really, guys, not in a way that I had expected, because for 18 long years, I had been abused. And for 18 long years, I wasn't able to tell him what he did to me. But the day that that abuse ended was almost the best day of my life. But it was a double-edged sword, because I'm going to share my story with you guys now. Is that he decided that he couldn't take this life no more. He decided that he wanted to exit this world. And the sad thing about that departure was it was the fact that my daughter found him at 12. And that then really just put another spanner in the works as far as how we were to cope, not only with the history of what I went through, but at the age of 31, how was I supposed to pick my children up, my 15-year-old son, my 12-year-old daughter, from that experience? But you know what? When you know God, even if you've been far from God, God said he will never leave us or never leave or forsake us. And I believe that God was always there. And that was the choice in the way that he had it fixed, because I know for a fact, ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching this, there was another route out that he had planned. And I don't know whether I would be here today telling you what I call my success story, because I was dealing with a real Jekyll and Hyde. So that's that was my way of getting out. But how did I move on with my life? How did I recover and cope after 18 years of abuse, after someone suiciding? And then how did I have to rebuild my life that I'd lost? You know, because I was used to being with somebody, even though they were abusive. I had this massive hole in my life to fill. So what did I do? I plugged myself back into the word. I plugged myself back into my faith, and I reconnected with source. I reconnected with God. That was my main source of being able to cope, knowing that I wanted to create a better future than I had the past for my children. That's what kept me going. And it wasn't easy. I made mistakes. I messed up. But you know what? I kept on going. I kept on going. And I planned my purpose. I planned my future. And the moment that you begin, if you're still stuck in a situation, let me speak to those of you who are still stuck in a situation right now. What you need to do is you need to make a decision. You need to decide. You almost need to have what I call a pre-packed SOS strategy that you know that you need to pull on, have that in your back pocket when the time is right. And no one's going to be able to tell you when that time is right. You will know it in your heart, And when you plan, you'll feel better equipped to be able to make your move. And trust me, it's so much easier today because there was no services out there. There was nobody out there to support me. So hence why I kept on running back, because sometimes, you have that thinking, it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't. How faulty was that? But that's what I did. But now in retrospect, if I had the opportunity to go back, then definitely I would have left a long time ago. But of course, I didn't have the wisdom I have now. I was vulnerable and I was dealing with someone who was a total schizophrenic. But again, as I say, the coping part for me in that particular situation was the light at the end of the tunnel for my children. That's what kept me going. And if I want to leave anything with you, okay, I'm just going to read for you. This is the book that I've written my story in. It's called The Single Mother's Diary. And this is a book designed to show 10 authors, 10 of us, 10 women, brave women have come together to show what life was like after being single, after abuse, and just sharing our story. So I'm just going to leave you a couple of nuggets from my chapter, which is called, bear with me one second, my chapter, which is called Get Out and Get Over: How to Cope and Recover After Tragedy, Trials, and Conflict. And just to leave you some learnings from my life experience and how I share my story on stages all over the world right now, is here's 7 nuggets for you. Number 1, faith is essential and it keeps you grounded when all around you seems chaotic and out of control. Number 2, take a peripheral view of your life at times. If you were to advise yourself on your current state, what would that advice look like? Then take that corresponding action. This is the first step to healing yourself. Number 3, remember, we all have a purpose. It's up to us whether we fulfill it or whether we don't. Aim to see what that truly is, as life is for living and not just existing. There is no shortcut and no action replay. Number 4, we all get hurt at one point or another in life. Our job is not to stay stuck in that place, but to use the experience as a learning curve to influence future choices and decisions more positively. Number 5, don't ever beat yourself up over mishaps or misunderstandings. And it's okay. We all make mistakes. Number 6, if you are feeling sad or low, don't fake it by saying, I'm fine. I used to say it all the time. Don't do that. It's better to say, I'm having a bad day, but I'm sure I'll get over it soon. And number 7, forget our limits. Forget or limit your time with toxic people, even if they are a family member. If they're not for you, don't waste any more time trying to convince them to get them on side. And that's what I want to leave with you. And here is my success story. After 18 years of abuse, after 17 years following that abuse, dedicating my life to the Lord, to the ministry, 2 children later, 5 beautiful grandsons later, I am now a successful faith and money breakthrough business coach, helping hundreds of Christian women and female entrepreneurs all across the world, helping them to create their programs, helping them to take their ministry giftings to the marketplace. I've pastored my own church. I was a street pastor. I started off working as a professional social worker. I've worked with the police forces, helping them working with victims of crime, harm, or conflict on restorative justice programs. I've co-authored a book. I've written another book about communications and healthy relationships. And now I'm an online business coach, helping women to sort out their money issues, helping women to establish their signature programs, taking their expertise from their brains, from their minds, and helping them to create their programs for their audience and for their niche. And I absolutely love what I do. So if you want to know a little bit more about my personal journey, or if you would like a copy of my book, The Single Mother's Diary, then please do drop a link in the comments, and you can connect with me on social media. I'm on Facebook as Netty B. I'm on Instagram as at official Netty B. And thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story in honor of all us women survivors of domestic violence. And if you are a lady that's still stuck in the situation, please know that there is certainly hope waiting for you on the other side. You take care. God bless you. And thank you for listening to my story.